Today we're going to be learning Kiddushin Daf Vav. This is the Daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started from the top, which actually connects to the very end of yesterday's Daf. What we started in the middle of Hamud Bet was all the languages of what has to be said when the get is given. So first of all, they make an assumption that something has to be said. Today we're going to examine somewhat through the sugyot what is the purpose of the declaration. So we learned from the Torah that you need that betrothal has to happen with money, with shtar, or with bi'ah, with sexual relations. But it seems all of a sudden that it's not enough. It also has to come with a statement that says, you are betrothed to me, or something of the likes of that. Some languages worked, some languages didn't. We saw, now we're going to explain finally, or a little bit better than yesterday, when Shmuel says, hareat muresali, hareat lila into, but then he says that works. But if you say, hareini ba'alech, I'm your husband, hareini arusech, I'm your betrothed, or your fiance, or in get the same idea, doesn't work. So the question is why? So now the Gemara explains at the top of Daf Vav, ha'chativ ki yikach, v'lo sheyikach et atzmo, v'hachativ v'shilcha, v'lo sheyishlach et atzmo. The pasuk says, when he takes a woman. Now, well, at first glance, it kind of sounds like that's very possessive. He's taking a woman, the isha niknet, as we saw the language, she is acquired. But here, what they're really saying is he is taking somebody else, meaning there's a relationship between two of them being formed here. And it's about the relationship when he takes someone. So when he says, Hareat mekudeshet li, you are betrothed to me, it's discussing what's happening in this relationship. V'lo sheyikach et atzmo. When he says, I'm your husband, it's true he's relating to her, but he's at the center. I'm your husband, and I'm your fiance. And it's all about him and his place in the relationship, as opposed to I'm again, the word acquiring is a little bit complicated, but I'm acquiring someone else, and now we're going to have a relationship. So therefore, Shmuel says the language where it's completely surrounding the man is not an appropriate language. And the same thing, b'shilcha, he's supposed to send her out. It's a way of separating his relationship with her. It's not all about him only, him being at the center. It's about his relationship with her. Tanu Rabbanan, hareat ishti, hareat arusati. Now we're going to, again, continue to go. We have another braita with different languages of what works, what doesn't work. You're my wife. You're my arusa, my fiance. Hareat knuyali, you're acquired to me. Mikudeshet, that all works. Hareat sheli, you are mine. Hareat birshuti, you are in my possession, or in my domain is a better way to say it, not my possession, but birshut means you're in my domain. Hareat zikukali, zikuka we learned from yibum. Zika, you're connected to me. Mikudeshet, those also work. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand something about the Braita. Why did the Braita have a break in the middle, right? When I said that break, you probably were thinking, or maybe we're thinking if you're used to Braita, that the next ones are going to be, this doesn't work. But instead, they also work. So, why didn't it just list them all together? To which they answer, Tana tlat tlatsham, inu v'garsinu. The Tana, when he said these, it must be that he learned them three at a time. So we learned those three, and therefore said those three together. And then at a different point, he learned those three, so he put those three together, and don't make too much of the fact that there's a break in the middle. Ibailu. Now they want to ask questions again about languages that work or don't work. Miyuchedetli, special to me, or just only for me. Miyuedetli, destined to me. Mahu. Okay, does miyuchedetli mahu? Miyuedetli mahu. Does that work? Does that work? Ezrati mahu. This is a playoff on a wife in the Torah. It says, right, with when Chava is created, it's ezer kinegdi. So ma ezrati mahu, negdati mahu, which are all relation to that story. Atsurati mahu. So atsurati comes from Rashi says, Lashon atzeret shetei ne'esefeti mi lebeti. She is gathered to me in my house. So maybe that also would be a language. Salati mahu. What if she's my rib, right? Coming from the story that Chava was created from the rib of Avram from the beginning of Breshit. Sigurati mahu. Also that comes from that story. Vayizgol basar tachtena. So skurati mahu. Tachti mahu. Also tachtena. So basically, you have all those words coming up in the pasuk where women are created. Tfusati mahu. Okay, tfusati is a language that's a little less clear what exactly it means, but tfusa seems to mean my also belonging to him somehow, like something he's tofes, something he holds is something that's his. Likuchati mahu. Okay, what if like from the word lakachat, right? Ki yikach, she is something I purchased. Again, not exactly purchased, but I know that word rubs us the wrong way. But yes, again, that comes from the words in the Torah, ki yikach. Pshut miachada. So we have an answer to only one of them. Tfusati, Detanya haomer likuchati harei ze mekudeshet mishum shenemar ki yikach ish isha. Okay, because that matches the language of the Torah where it specifically talks about marriage, therefore that one works. But all the others we don't have an answer for. Ibaila, another question. Charufati. What if you say charufa? Now, in the Torah it says, and we're going to see right now, actually we'll quote it in a minute, but it talks about a shifcha charufa. Shifcha charufa is a shifcha Knaanit who is charufa, which means she's designated to be kind of the shifcha for this Eved Ivri, okay? Meaning there's an Eved Ivri and a shifcha Knaanit who are working together, and she is designated to him. He is allowed, while he's an Eved, to have relations with this shifcha, and then the children stay in the house as slaves. Again, a very hard concept for us to understand. But the point being here that charufa also has the concept of a person who's designated to somebody else. Now, in that case, it's not actually marriage. Tashma, let's learn from here. So now we see that word charufa in Judea is used also to mean betrothed woman. So therefore, if someone says charufati, it's mekudeshet, because in Judea they use the word in that way. So anyone who says it uses it that way. To which the Gemara, or it could be meant as marriage, a betrothed. So the Gemara says that doesn't make any sense. What is Judea the majority of the world? And it's just because in Judea they use the word that way doesn't mean we can assume this is what he means. Hachikamar. Again, this goes back to the root of what's the purpose of this declaration. This statement that he's making needs to be made clear that he intends to marry her or betroth her with this whatever money that he's passing. So now the question becomes, if it's not clear, because people don't necessarily use this, right? He gives her money and he says, you're charufati. We don't know what charufati means. We don't use charufati to mean betrothed woman in this other place. So just because in Judea they do it doesn't mean that you would do it here. So again, it seems like the words are coming to give meaning to this action of giving over money, let's say, or having sexual relations, but he would have to say, you're betrothed to me. Otherwise, it would just be regular sexual relations. Shtar is a little bit more complicated. In shtar, there's a big machloket, because in the shtar, it says, Harei mekudeshet li, with the shtar. So it seems very clear what the intent is. So there's actually a machloket whether the words need to be also said when he gives her the document or not. Right? If you remember, by get, even though it says Harei muteret l'chol adam, if he gives her a get and he doesn't tell her what's in the get, she's not divorced. But one can distinguish between get and marriage, because as we talked about in Gittin, she needs to understand that she's being sent out of the house. So if she never reads the document, she won't really understand. Whereas in marriage, you could say the same thing, right? Marriage, she has to actually be a willing partner. If she doesn't know what's happening, then she's not a willing partner. On the other hand, maybe there's a way to distinguish. Again, there's a debate about whether the words are necessary or not necessary in the shtar. Maybe the assumption is she reads it and then she knows what's in it. So again, this is a debate among the Rishonim, whether it needs to be written or it doesn't need to be written. So I'm sorry, whether it needs to be said or doesn't need to be said in the case of Kiddushin B'shtar. But it seems pretty clear that it needs to be said, although again, we're going to get into this more as we go on. Some sort of declaration needs to be said. The question is, what kind of declaration would be clear? What words are clear? What words are not clear? And if it's not clear, then it's not going to work. So, and also the question becomes, is it for her or is it for others to know? Okay, maybe the witnesses need to understand what's going on here, right? Just because he passes her a ring doesn't mean he plans to marry her with it, right? A ring at least is symbolic of marriage, at least in our day, but still doesn't necessarily mean that the purpose of giving the ring is to be betrothed. So now we're back to the statement in the Braita about if you say Charufati Mekudesha, because in Yehuda Korin La Rusa Charufa. So they say, again, Yehuda is Rov HaOlam, that doesn't make any sense. So they say, okay, let's edit the Braita a little. Hachikama. This is what they mean to say. Haomer Charufati Mekudeshet. Why? Shene'emar v'hi shifcha nechrefet leish, because she is designated to him, and then that should work. Ve'od, and furthermore, Yehuda korin la rusa charufa in Judea, they call a betrothed woman in a charufa. So then they say Yehuda ve'od likha. I didn't understand. Why do you have to add this point about Yehuda to the pasuk? You already have a pasuk. What more do you need? What is saying that in Judea this is what they call people? That would help. The pasuk already is there. Ella hachikamar. So third attempt to understand this bright. Haomer charufa beYehuda mekudesha. She can be Yehuda korim la rusa charufa. So now we're going to say, oh no, the charufa only works in Judea. Okay, so basically we had, actually I counted, there's 10 languages here that we have a question about. We answered the kuchati works, and now we had this other question, which was number 10, charufa, it only works in Judea, according to the new understanding of this bright. Now the Gemara wants to know about all these cases, but Maya Skina. Now, until now, we assume you have to have words, but now they say the following. If you're going to have all these statements that we're asking about, okay, miyuchedet, miyuedet, salati, all that. If he's not talking about gitin and kiddushin, mina yadamai ka'amrala, then how on earth would she know what he's talking about? Right. If I'm talking to some random guy, we had never planned on getting married, and he says miyuchedetli, and we weren't talking about kiddushin, how on earth would I know? And he gives me money. How on earth would I know what he's talking about? So, well, if he's already talking about gitin and kiddushin, all of a sudden we're going to say, wait a minute. If we're having a discussion about getting married or, getting engaged, and then the boy I'm talking to, the man I'm talking to gives me a ring, well, that works even without any declaration. All of a sudden we're going to see, in that case, there's no need for declaration because that's exactly what we were talking about. Titnan, as it says in the Mishnah. Okay, this is Mishnah Maser Sheni, actually. Ditnan היה מדבר עם האישה על עסקי גיטה וקידושה ונתן לה גיטה וקידושה ולא פירש. Okay, if he was having a discussion with this woman about gitin or kiddushin, and he gives her a get or kiddushin, and he doesn't say, this is your get, this is your kiddushin, Rabbi Yossi Omer Dayo, Rabbi Yossi says that is sufficient. Rabbi Yehuda Omer tzarich lefaresh. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, no, you still have to say something. But Amar Rav Huna Amar Shmuel halachat Rabbi Yossi, but we paskin like Rabbi Yossi. So basically, we don't understand this case. If they weren't talking about gitin and kiddushin, of course these languages wouldn't work. They're definitely not clear that he's planning to betroth her. And if it's out of the blue, and if it's not out of the blue, and they're in the middle of a discussion about betrothal, you don't even need to say anything. So Amrei la'olam b'medaber imal is kegita v'kiddusheha. No. It must be that you were talking about kiddushin and gerushin. The idi yayiv lavishate kachinam. While Rabbi Yossi says you don't need anything, that's because if he just gives her a ring, let's say, or money, and doesn't say anything, not saying anything is actually better, because then it's clear what his intent is. But hacha b'mayaskina, what's the case here where you said miyuchedet, or any of those languages? The yayiv lava amar bahani lishani. It's because you added, sometimes by saying something, it makes it maybe even worse. When you give her money and say, you were talking about marriage, and then you say, I'm giving you money, and you say, you're going to be miyuchedetli. Hachi kamibayale. This is the question. Maybe he's making some other proposition of, I want you to work for me, or something like that. And maybe not, I want to betroth you. Now, it's a little bit strange because they were talking about betrothal, but still, once you add a language that's not clearly a language of betrothal, it kind of throws things off. And maybe you actually meant something else. And the answer to all these questions is tegu, right? We don't really know in the end what the answer to these questions are. Gufa. So now we're going to go back to the statement that we just, machloket we just quoted. Hayam deber ma'isha l'skei gita v'kiddusha v'natan la gita v'kiddusha v'lo peresh. Rabbi Yossi omer dayo, Rabbi Yehuda omer tzarich lefaresh. So again, you're talking about Gitin and Kiddushin, you give her money, and that's enough. According to Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yehuda, no. You have to say words, Harat Mekudeshet. V'amar Rabbi Yehuda amar Shmuel, v'hu she'asukim ba'oto inyan. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, that Rabbi Yossi says it's enough. It's only if they're still in the middle of that conversation. But now they say there's actually machloket tanaim about this, whether you have to be still in the same topic or you could have moved on and switched topics. Kitinai, as this machloket tanaim goes, Rabbi Omer v'hu shasukim ba'oto inyan, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Omer af al pi she'en asukim ba'oto inyan. So Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says you don't actually have to be in the same topic, to which the Gemara says, wait a minute. You were having a conversation at 5 o'clock about getting betrothed. At 7 o'clock, right, you finish the conversation by 6. At 7 o'clock, he comes along, he gives her money. What, you can assume that was for betrothal without saying anything? So that's what the Gemara is going to ask. How on earth does she know what he's saying? Now, it's a bit of a strange question. What he's saying, what he really means is what he's doing, not what he's saying. How on earth does she know the meaning of the giving of the money? So, Amar Abaye minyan le'inyan b'oto inyan. Abaye says we're talking about that you weren't talking anymore about should we get engaged or should we not. You had already moved on to discussing something else related, like how much is the nedunya going to be and how many fields do you have? I'm just paraphrasing Rashi, okay, where they started getting more into the nitty-gritty details, okay? But they weren't anymore talking about the betrothal itself, just things surrounding the betrothal. So then it would work, but not if you were already switched topics onto something else entirely. Again, you see how important it is that the woman understand what's going on here. And that's also because the woman has to agree to it, right? She has to also understand what's going on. Even in get where she doesn't have to agree, she has to know that she's being sent out of the house. So that is all important for the woman to understand. And again, like I mentioned before, so first of all, it's the Tosfot Riaz Zaken on the page. He talks about the importance that the witnesses understand also what's going on. So it could be also for other people. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha ke Rabbi Yossi. So also we have here another psika like Rabbi Yossi. Amar le Rabbi Yemer le Rav Ashi ve'elahad Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. One second, you just quoted Shmuel as saying halacha ke Rabbi Yossi, but Shmuel says he's just asking a question. When Shmuel says kol she'eino yodea b'tiv gitin v'kiddushin lo yehe lo esek imahen afilu lo shmiya lehad Rav Huna Amar Shmuel. So he says, wait a minute. There's this law that in order to be a judge in a get or kiddushin case, you have to know all the laws and all the ins and outs. Why is this? Because if you make any sort of mistake, you're basically permitting a woman to go marry other people, or right, there's all sorts of major ramifications. So anyone who doesn't understand the tiv of kiddushin, all the laws associated with it, can't be a judge in this matter. So are you saying even if he doesn't know this particular law, is this part of one of the things you have to know as a judge if you want to be a judge for a get in your kiddushin case? That this halacha that Rav Huna in the name of Shmuel says that we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, is that the case? So Amrle inachinami, he says yes, you have to know this. This is one of the basics. Okay, even though it doesn't seem so basic, because how often is it that somebody doesn't say anything? But yes. וכן בגירושים, נתן לגיטה ואמר לה, הרי המשולחת, הרי המגורשת, הרי המותרת לכל אדם, הרי מגורשת. Okay, this goes back to Shmuel's statement we saw at the end of yesterday's daf, which was, by gerushin, again, he would have to say, you're meshulachat, you're megureshet, you're muteret l'chol adam, right? Then she'll be divorced. Pshita, natan lagita va'amar la li'ishto hareat bat cholim. Now we're going to get into all different languages of get, and this is going to be a repeat sugya that we saw in Gitin. It's obvious if he gives her a get and says to her, you are a free woman, turning now to Amabet, lo amar velo klum. He didn't say anything. A free woman is not that, and yet this, by the way, this again we saw in Gitin also, goes to counter all those understandings that, oh, the man acquires the woman and she's his possession. She's not at all. Being a free woman, you're not owned by somebody else, even though he does acquire her. It's more of a symbolic kind of acquiring. And she's not owned by him. Okay, we're going to see that a few times today. So we saw it in the beginning of the daf, and now we're going to see it again, that clearly she's not bound to him and, frozen in marriage. She's not owned by him like a slave, Bat chorin is a language for a slave. She's not a slave. Amar la l'shifchato hareat muteret l'chol adam lo amar v'lo klum. If he says to Shifcha Knaanit, you're permitted to everybody in the world, which, by the way, would happen if she was free, she'd be permitted, but that's not a language you use for a Shifcha Knaanit, because there you have to really relate to the fact that he owns her, that she is a possession of his, because she's a slave. Again, as hard as that is for us to understand, but they did have slavery in those days. So he would have to, that's not a meaningful statement. Hareat muteret l'chol adam, lo amar v'lo klum. But Amarla, so those two are very clear. You use the language that's clear. If talking about a slave for your wife, it doesn't work. And clear language for a slave, for a wife, for a slave doesn't work. Okay, those languages don't fit. But Amarla li'ishto hareat la'atzmech mahu. But if he says to the wife, you are your own, okay, which means basically could mean, right? Even free woman could mean you're free to marry anybody, but you don't usually use that language in terms of you're allowed to be married to anybody. But la'atzmech could kind of count, you're on your own now, you can marry anyone you want. It's kind of similar. On the other hand, it's also a language used by slaves. Mi amrinan l'malacha ka'amarla. Do we say he means you're, remember, when she's married, generally the arrangement is all her proceeds go to the husband, and in exchange, the husband gives her food. So if he says hareat la'atzmech, maybe he just means you're going to work and keep your proceeds, and I'm not going to feed you. So which one is it, right? L'malacha kamarla, does he mean for work? Or dilma legamre kamarla, does he mean completely also for the purposes of marriage, of having a relationship with somebody else, being able to marry someone else? So again, does he mean to divorce her or not? Amale Ravina l'Ravashi tashma. Ravina says to Ravashi, let's learn from here. Titanya. Gufo shel get shichur. The wording of a get shichur, when you free this woman from slavery, is hareata bat ben chorin. Okay, this is a man from slavery. You're a free man. Hareata la'atzmecha. You are on your own. Now again, when it comes to a slave, we're talking about a Canaanite slave. What happens to them when they get freed? So if you're new to Gemara, then you might not know this, so I'll repeat all the details of a Canaanite slave that we talked about a lot in the last Masechet especially, which is, if you're a Canaanite slave, you are owned by the master. You do a semi-conversion, okay? You become somewhat Jewish. You're obligated in all the mitzvot except for time-bound commandments, because you're kind of owned by your master and you have to do what your master says, so therefore you don't do the time-bound commandments. Then when you get freed, which you're not supposed to get freed, but if your master's not supposed to free slaves, but if he frees them, then they become completely Jewish. Okay, they also if they're a man, they get circumcised before they become a slave. So then they become completely Jewish, and then they can marry anyone they want, right? Anyone Jewish. Before, they're only allowed to marry other slaves. They can't marry a Jewish woman. So in a sense, it's very similar to a get of a woman where, number one, the financial obligations are severed, and number two, it changes the marital status. So the same two things happen for the slave. Now here comes the comparison, and again proves that a woman is not owned by her husband, because it says the following. In comparing it to a slave, here comes the kal vachomer. Uma eviknani dekane leguf. Sorry, I skipped the word hashta. Hashta means now. So what it really means is here, it's the beginning of the argument. If hareat atala atzmecha works, and this slave is now totally free and can now marry a Jewish woman, Eved Knani dekane legufe. If the Eved Knani is owned by the husband, and ki amarle hareat atala atzmecha legamre kamarla, and when he says you are for yourself, it's a complete and utter separation, both financially and for marriage purposes. Then isha de lo kane legufe, then a woman who's got much less of a connection to the husband in terms of, right, she's not acquired, her body is not owned, does not belong to the husband, okay? He acquires her in marriage, but he doesn't own her body. Lo kol shekain, so all the more so, hareat la'atzmech should be enough to free. So that's how they come to the conclusion that hareat la'atzmech would work in that case. Amarle, also for a woman. Amarle Ravina l'Ravashi. Now we're going to flip the question and say, what about a different language for a slave? We're now moving into the slaves. Amar lavdo enli esek bach. I don't want to have anything to do with you. My, what's the situation? Mi amrinan enli esek bach legamre kamar. Does he mean completely? Which would mean, again, both financial and he's now Jewish. Or maybe he just wants to say, I don't want you to work for me anymore, but it doesn't mean you're free and you can then go marry anyone you want. So it should be actually Rav Chanin, Rav Ashi, but Rav Chanin Mechoza. Rav Ashi, it was either Rav Chanin or it was Rav Chanin from Mechoza. Tashma, let's learn from here. If, again, this is a complete repeat sugya from Gittin that we learned not so long ago. If you sell your slave, your Gentile slave, to Ovei Kochavim, to another Gentile, he goes free entirely. But the first master needs to give him a release, a document, an emancipation document. Rashbag says, this is only if shalo katav alav ono. If you didn't write in ono, which in a minute we'll see what that is. Aval katav alav ono, zehu shichuro. But if you wrote the ono, that frees him. So hechi dami ono, what is ono? In other words, if you write this ono, that's enough of a get shichrur. You don't need more than that. What does it say in the ono? Amar l'Rav Sheshet, the katavla, that you wrote to him, Kisha mimenu en esek bach. If when I did the sale, I wrote down in the document that if this slave runs away from me, from his master that I'm selling him to, en esek bach, I will have nothing to do with him. What do you see here? If you wrote that, and the master sets him free, the Gentile master that you sold him to, he becomes Jewish because en esek bach is enough of a shichrur. So what do you see? En esek bach works as language of freeing a slave completely. Okay, so there we have it. What we did here was, again, let's just go back to the beginning and do a quick summary before we move on to the next section. We were talking about languages that work for Kiddushin. We had a slew of questions. First, we had some languages that do work. Then we had some languages that we didn't know about that we ended up not really being concluding on almost any of them except for two. And one of them only partially, only in Judea. Harufati, right? Lekuchati works no matter what. Harufati works in Judea because of the language they use there. Then we moved on to talk about and then how we relate to this. When were these questions asked? We then concluded we asked these questions when you were already dealing with Kiddushin, and then you use these languages. Otherwise, for sure, they wouldn't work. And then the question is, what did you mean by them? Was it, I want you to work for me, or was it, I want to betroth you? And then we went in a little bit in depth into this machloket about when you're in the topic of get and marriage, and then he gives her something, right? Which does, and he doesn't say anything. Then is that enough? Is it clear then that she knows what's going on? Right? We saw that with Rabbi Yossi, and then in what case you have to still be in the same topic, or not necessarily in the same topic, or someone in the same topic. Then we went on to the Gerushin, and we talked about different languages, which were kind of copying the language of Eved for woman, woman for an Eved, and then this other language of Ein Esek Bach. Would that work? And now we're moving on to other kinds of betrothals. Amar Abai, Hamakadesh b'milveh ena mekudesh. A man can betroth a woman with money, but what if he says to her, just don't pay me back your loan. Hey, you borrowed money from me, don't pay it back, and with that, you'll be betrothed. Abai says, Ena mekudesh. This doesn't work. Why doesn't this work? So look at Rashi. Rashi says, Dikicha, and Ena mekudeshet, Dikicha miste Ephron gamrina. We learned this all from Ephron. Diyayiv midi b'shat kiddushin. He actually gave something during kiddushin. Umilva lahotza'anitna. Now, what's the issue here? In a sense, he did give her money, but because she didn't have to pay back the money, but there's no real money here that's attributed to her right now. He gave her money. That money, milva lahotza'anitna, means the intent was she was going to spend the money, make money somewhere else, and give it back. So that same money that he gave her is no longer there anymore. Ukvarhen shalan, they're hers. It's just that it's just that she's supposed to give him other money, meaning kind of like it's all on paper. Right? And that doesn't work. She has to actually get something. Okay, so this doesn't work. Bahana'at milvet mikudeshet asur la'asoke mipnei haramat ribit. Now this starts to get interesting. Because now we're going to talk about interest in loans. So what's hana'at milvet? If he, okay, we're going to actually have to understand exactly what this means. But the gist is there's an amount of money that a person would pay to get their loan pushed off. Okay, so if there's money here that he's willing to push off the loan, there's value to that. okay? And so he can basically, since there's a monetary value attributed to that, and we're talking about that she would pay money, let's say she has money, I'm willing to pay this money. He says, keep that money, and that will be your kiddushin. So that could work for kiddushin, but you can't do this because it's haramat ribit. What's haramat ribit? It's like ribit. It's rabbinic ribit, not ribit to oraita. So we're going to have to understand here. We're going to learn a little bit about what is interest by Torah law and what is interest by rabbinic law, and what's the problem. If it's that, and originally they took out the loan. Now, in order for things to be rebate, really it has to, by Torah, has to be that we agreed upon in the beginning that there would be interest when I took the loan. So if I took the loan for 4 zuzim, let's say, and you said, okay, but you have to pay me back 5. So that's rebate. And then when it comes time for me to pay the money back, you say, listen, keep the 5th, okay? And don't give that back to me. And with that, you'll be betrothed. So we have 2 problems with that. Number 1, haribit ma'al. That's classic rebate. And ve'od hainu milveh. And also that's returning a loan, basically. He's basically saying you don't have to return your loan, which we just said doesn't work because the money there was no actual money there. So lo tzricha de'irvach lezman. So what it must be is what I said before, which is he gives her, it's the hana'ah. Okay, I shouldn't have actually explained it before because it kind of explained it and then it became complicated because the first option was saying that it wasn't anything about buying time. The first option was saying he basically waives the interest, but that can't be because that would be definitely interest and not haramat ribit, which is only ribit midrabana. So what it must be is arvach leizman, which some people explain she would pay the money, or some people say someone else pays the money. Okay, because if someone else pays the money, then it's really not ribit. If she would pay the money, then it would be closer to rebate. There's a machloket whether this is actually rebate by Torah law or not. By the way, in order for it to be rebate, number 1, you have to have agreed from the beginning. Now, this is missing that because you didn't agree from the beginning. She just says, I want to buy more time. Some people say even that's rebate. But if she's not losing money on the deal, then it's not interest. Like if someone else pays my interest, like they decide, oh, I'll pay for you interest on this loan, that's not actually interest. So this would be only haramat ribit because it looks like ribit. Because in the end, she's getting a benefit of being able to push off the loan. He's getting more really for it. And then it just doesn't look right. But it would work for kiddushin. It just doesn't work because it's just, you shouldn't do this because it's like interest. Okay. So now, I'm a Rav. If he says, here's money, I'm betrothing you with this, under the condition that you return it to me. And we're going to talk about this in all different ways. Okay. B'mecher lo kana, if you were making a sale and you pay money and say, I'm giving you this money, but you're going to have to return it to me in 5 minutes, then that doesn't work. B'isha ena mekudeshet, if you do it with a woman, she's not betrothed. B'pidyon haben eino ein beno padoi, if you do it to redeem your son, right? The mitzvah pidyon haben, that doesn't work, your firstborn son. B'truma yatsa yedei netina. If you do this by truma, you're supposed to give truma to the kohen. Let's say you do this. So what happens? You did the truma, you gave it, okay, even though you're not, right, you're saying I'm going to take it back. It works, but you shouldn't do that. Why? Now, first of all, what would happen if it was truma? So let's say I'm not a kohen, I give my truma to a kohen, and I say, but you have to give it back to me. Now, I have nothing to do with this. So in the end, what I'll do is I'll give it to him. I'll fulfill my mitzvah of giving the truma. But then what am I going to do with the truma? Well, I'll just sell it to him for a low price, right? Because like there's a price that you could sell truma for to a kohen. If for some reason you end up with truma, let's say I inherit truma. My father's a kohen, so I inherit truma. I could sell that to a kohen at a low price. So I can't do this, okay? In other words, theoretically, I fulfill my mitzvah of truma, but I shouldn't do this. Why? Because it looks like a kohen masayah bebeit hagranot. There's 2 ways of understanding what this case is. Or why this is a problem. A kohen who works in someone's threshing floor, he shouldn't give the money, the truma, to the kohen instead of his salary. Why? Because truma is supposed to be a gift. Truma is not supposed to be that I have to pay for it. And if I'm working for the truma, then I'm basically paying for it. Okay, then it's not a gift. That's one reason. Some people think it's because we have this relationship, and if you always give it to me, then you're going to feel bound to give it to me, okay? And then or if I accepted this, because you wanted it back, then I'm basically, you're going to end up next time giving me truma also. And that's going to give me an unfair advantage over other kohanim. So that could be a different reason why this isn't good. And either way, either explanation, it's not good. Micah Savar Rava. So now we don't understand. Why did Rava make this distinction between in a mecher, it doesn't work, in kiddushin, it doesn't work, in pidyon ben, it doesn't work, but it works for truma. If you say giving a gift, even though you have the intent to get it back, is a gift for that moment, and therefore it is a gift, and therefore, what will we say? Then all of the four of them should work fine. And if you say it's not a gift, then the truma shouldn't work either. And furthermore, we actually know what Rava holds about this. He actually says it is a gift. How do we know this? Well, in a totally different topic, by the mitzvah of the four species, the arba minim that we're supposed to take on Sukkot, it says, you have to take them on the first day. They have to be owned by you. So what if you don't own them? Well, to Amar Rava, if you say, take this etrog on the condition that you return it to me, so for that moment it's mine and I can fulfill the mitzvah, even as long as I give it back to you and I fulfill the condition of that gift. So it shows that it actually is mine. So Ela Amar Rav Ashi, Bekulu Kane Levar Mi Isha. So Rav Ashi changes what was said before. He says, really what Rava said was, it doesn't work for any of them, except for one. Okay? I'm sorry, my mistake. It works for all of them. Matanam and Lachzir is a gift, and it works for all of them, other than the woman. Why? Because a woman is not acquired by chalipin, which is this handkerchief thing, right? The symbolic act of, she actually has to get something. Doesn't work with chalipin. So therefore, this doesn't work either. Now, why? Because either this is symbolic, it's just like chalipin, because she's getting something but giving it right back, or it looks like chalipin, and people will think that chalipin is okay. This actually is real because it is a gift. The fact that she has to give it back, though, makes it look like it's symbolic. Okay? And some people think that it's also because she doesn't benefit from it, and she needs to have benefit, and perhaps that's the reason. Okay, that relates to the things we saw before, where she benefits from most of the ways of kiddushin. Okay, next. So he basically clarifies that I also heard that Rava said it like you explained. Okay, and that's it. That's the end of our sugya for today. So the last section we did was trying to determine, can you get betrothed with some sort of loan, right? In the end, not a loan, but yes, the benefit, if someone pays the husband, or someone is willing to pay the husband money to, the fact that someone could be willing to pay money to have her push off paying back the loan, that means that she can actually benefit from him saying, I'll push off the loan for you, and for that amount of money, you're betrothed to me. Okay, that works, but there is a problem of ribit midorabanan by doing that. And then we talked about these other cases of a gift, amanat lachzir. Does that work? Does it not? In the end, we said it doesn't work for kiddushin, but it does work for everything else. And it doesn't work for kiddushin because we said of this chalipin, which we explained in a bunch of different ways, what the concern is of the chalipin here. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov.